All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Vincent Iolenti, a social scientist in the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Consent-Based Siting. I'd like to welcome you all to the sixth installment of our Consent-Based Siting webinar series. The recording of our previous webinar is now available on our website, which is found at energy.gov/consent-based siting. That webinar explored how to make spent nuclear fuel topics reach new audiences and move closer to the center of public discussion. To do this, it convened a multi-talented group of journalists, energy policy experts, social media influencers, communications professionals, a documentary filmmaker, public engagement specialists, and others. In today's webinar, though, we'll be taking a different approach. Over the next hour, DOE officials will provide updates on consent-based siting progress with the process, and will answer questions related to the future of the Federal Consolidated Interim Storage of Spent Nuclear Fuel. The questions will be drawn from public inquiries submitted during our previous webinars, the past 5 sessions we've had, from our social science research efforts, the fieldwork and the interviews we do across the country, and from public emails that are sent to our DOE inboxes. And we'd like to thank everyone who submitted questions and feedback over the past few months. Your perspectives have been invaluable to our efforts to design and refine the consent-based siting process, which we're currently in the process of doing. It's a living document. So after we go through some frequently asked questions, we'll then start answering questions directly from you, the live public audience. So if you'd like to submit a question to us today, please feel free to do so using Zoom.gov's Q&A feature. This is a text box that usually appears in the bottom of your screen, but if you're using your phone, it may appear at the top of your screen. And friendly reminder that this webinar is being recorded and transcribed, and you'll be able to view it on DOE's YouTube channel as well as on our website when it's posted after the fact in due course. So I currently serve as the federal manager for DOE's Consent-Based Siting Consortia effort. The Consent-Based Siting Consortia is composed of 12 project teams, and they're drawn from academia, from nonprofits, industry, and beyond. It's an interdisciplinary and multi-sectoral group. Each team received roughly $2 million to carry out public engagement activities and build community capacity around DOE's efforts to site one or more federal consolidated interim storage facilities. So I'd like to kick off this webinar by answering a question that I've received several times over the past few months as federal manager. And the question is, what are the consent-based siting consortia up to these days, and where are they engaging? In what regions? Is it near me? Where is it? So I'll start with the what part of the question, and then I'll move over to the where part of the question. So this slide was updated at roughly the halfway point of the consortia's 2-year performance period, so around September. We'll actually get another update next month based on some of the progress they've made since the previous update. And as you can see, the 12 project teams have been really hard at work. They've done 119 public engagements in various parts of the country. There's been 10 tribal engagements so far. There's been 22 government engagements at the local, state, and federal levels. They've issued 12 community grants, and we have more on the horizon. And there's been 20 information resource projects that have been spearheaded and implemented. So the consortia's activities, they've been really wide-ranging. They've set up community listening sessions, they've set up public workshops, and they've organized visits to nuclear power plants. They've disseminated informational handouts, and they've set up digital infrastructures and peer networks for information sharing and communications materials as well as educational materials. They've leveraged geospatial technologies to inform public engagement as well. They've set up learning modules and mentoring opportunities for groups traditionally underrepresented in science, technology, and engineering. And this has included even creative events like a summer camp they've set up in upstate New York. The consortia has learned from communities already involved in nuclear waste management, such as communities in which DOE has been managing legacy waste for many decades. So the consortia is engaged with all sorts of entities. They're faith-based organizations, labor unions, school districts, philanthropic foundations, local libraries. They've been to Kiwanis clubs. They've been to Rotary clubs. Today I learned they went to the Audubon Society event in a regional community and engaged with people there and found a lot of interest in nuclear issues. And we've been especially impressed by some of the more creative and innovative approaches they've taken. So they participated in regional art festivals, they've hosted nuclear-related film screenings, they've developed social media content, and they've organized a bunch of unique workshops as well. This even featured a Narrative Futures Hackathon featuring science fiction authors trying to understand the future of spent nuclear fuel from a more imaginative perspective. So now I will address the consortia's geographic reach, the second part of that question. This map you see here shows the locations of the 12 awardees, their partners, and the regions in which they've engaged so far. The 12 consortia leads are listed right here on the right. We just had a really productive meeting over the past 2 days with them to hear about their progress over the past 3 months. I should add that many of the project teams also have sub-partner organizations. For instance, the NC State or North Carolina State Consortium also has a sub-partner, the Tribal Consent-Based Coalition based in California. So it's actually that one consortium spans the entire nation, coast to coast. So they've also issued funding and sub-grant opportunities to community and smaller organizations around the countries as well. And these have enabled a larger spectrum of entities to facilitate public discussions, conduct community-level research, and take part in regional action planning at a very, very local level. So we plan to update this map you see here, as well as the metrics infographic that I showed on that previous slide, about every 90 or so days. Both can be found on our website. If you want to continue to see the updates, you want to go to energy.gov/consent-based siting. So I hope that's helpful for understanding the consortia's progress so far. However, if you have further questions about the consortia, please, by all means, reach out to us. You can get us at consent-based siting at hq.doe.gov, and we'll look forward to receiving emails with any sorts of feedback. Never hesitate to do that. So with that, now I'll introduce our next speaker. Her name is Marla Morales. She's the very talented director of DOE's Office of Consent-Based Siting. She's also a geologist by training and a phenomenal lead for our team over in the Office of Consent-Based Siting. And Marla's going to address some of the requests we've received for more information about DOE's upcoming plans for a national call for expressions of interest from professional host communities. So over to you, Marla.
Well, hello, everyone. As Vincent said, my name is Marla Morales. I'm the director of the Office of Consent-Based Siting. Thank you for joining us on this webinar. So before we get into the question and answer component for DOE, I wanted to give you an update of where we're at in the consent-based siting process. So over the last year or so, the consortia, as you saw from those maps and those metrics, have been covering the continental United States. And they've been really helping DOE understand the landscape of communities and where they're at in their nuclear conversations. Now, whether that community is a person, a family unit, a county, or a state, each of those components come together to form a collaboration, a collaborative process that feeds into the consent-based siting process for siting a federal consolidated interim storage facility. Over the next year or so, we're going to be releasing a couple of documents. The first would be the consent-based siting process document, which will build on a previous document released in 2023, but it'll also include how the collaboration that we've been hearing about from the consortia and our other engagements and activities works into the consent-based siting process. In addition to that, we'll be releasing the site screening criteria. That will include additional details on the criteria a community would need to meet to be interested in hosting a federal consolidated interim storage facility. But that leads me into my next one. So in the fall of 2025, DOE will release a national call for expressions of interest. That'll be when DOE asks communities who are interested in potentially hosting a site to raise their hand. They will not be raising their hand to volunteer to host a site. They're going to be raising their hand to start a conversation. They're going to be raising their hand to say, I want to learn more about what this process is and if my community is a good fit for it. There's a lot of really exciting stuff going on right now, and we're really looking forward to what's going to happen in the next year or so. So on that note, I will turn it back over to Vincent, and we can start the question and answers.
Thank you, Marla, for your remarks. And as you mentioned, we are now going to turn over to the Q&A period. This is, after all, called You Ask, DOE Answers. And so To pursue that segment of this webinar, we have 4 leading officials from DOE's Office of Spent Fuel and High-Level Waste Management. It's my pleasure to introduce them. We have Paul Murray, DOE's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Spent Fuel and High-Level Waste Disposition. We have Kimberly Petrie, DOE's Associate Deputy Assistant Secretary for Spent Fuel and High-Level Waste Disposition. We have Dr. Erica Bickford, the Director of DOE's Office of Storage and Transportation, and of course, Marla Morales, the Director of DOE's Office of Consent-Based Siting, who we just heard from moments ago. And as I mentioned, I'll start by pitching these this panel of leadership, some key questions we've received over the past few months at DOE from our various inputs into our program. And after that, we'll transition over to questions from the live public audience. So if you haven't already, please consider submitting a question to us via the Q&A section below. So with that in mind, let's get started. So question number 1 is for Paul Murray. And the question is, doesn't the Nuclear Waste Policy Act need to be amended first before DOE can move forward with federal consolidated interim storage? What efforts are you pursuing at DOE to help change the NWPA, Paul? Over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So let me answer your question in a roundabout way, Vincent. So we first started using nuclear power in the US in 1958. So we've been generating spent nuclear fuel now for over 60 years and accumulating it at the reactor sites. So the original Nuclear Waste Policy Act, written in 1982, was a carefully thought through, well-prepared document. You know, a lot of people put a lot of time and effort into writing that document, and, you know, it was pretty good. It talked a lot about collaboration, cooperation, and we actually, at the time, had just down selected from 5 sites for a future repository down to 3. Okay? So at the time of the first Nuclear Waste Policy Act, we had 3 sites potentially for deep geological repository. Fast forward to 1987, still some people weren't born then, but 1987, the Nuclear Waste Policy Act was amended by Congress. We went from 3 sites, jumped straight to 1 site. We selected Yucca Mountain as the site of the future national repository. 2010, the Yucca Mountain site stopped. Okay? So one of the things that we face 60 years into this program of trying to manage for spent nuclear fuel in the US is really, there's no technical issues, there's no engineering issues. What we're trying to do is really try to establish public trust and political will to actually do something. So we've done all the studies we need to do. We've had all the commissions that we need to tell us that we need to do something. We've had all the National Academy science studies that we need to say we actually need to do something. So we've got to build trust and demonstrate to everybody what we can do. So the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, as written, as amended, as written, is allowing us to move forward. Okay, it is allowing us to move forward with this consent-based siting, and we are making tangible progress there. It is allowing us to move forward with the design of a consolidated interim storage facility, and we're making significant progress there. We've designed and built the Atlas Railcar. It's got certified this year. People can go and kick the tires on it, but it's ready to roll. We are realigning our disposal program to actually be ready to go when we're actually authorized to go. So the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, as amended, actually allows us to do what we've been doing and build public trust and political trust. We can actually be trusted with more amounts of money to actually move the program forward. Does it need to be amended? Yes, it needs to be amended. So what are we doing for that? Levin, the Representative Levin and Pluger actually introduced a new bill a few weeks ago into the House, talking about a new organization to actually manage the spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste for the US. The bill was the bill had been around for a while, but it was very well written, it had good bones, and I'm hoping it's something that industry can consolidate around to basically present a common vision, common mission to the politicians that we need to basically amend the Nuclear Waste Policy Act to be able to go to the next step in what we need to do. So to be clear, as a DOE, we are doing as much as we can under the existing authorization with the existing funding to demonstrate we're moving, okay? Now it's really time for the politicians to amend the Nuclear Waste Policy Act to allow us to go to the next step. Okay, that's my answer, Vincent.
Okay, thank you so much, Paul, for the comprehensive and detailed answer to a challenging question. Now we have a question for Kim Petrie. So, Dr. Petrie, this one is about how the Office of Consent-Based Siting is housed within DOE's Office of Nuclear Energy. And so the question is, why is DOE still supporting and advocating for nuclear energy? It's expensive. It takes too long to implement, according to this, the person submitting this, and it results in long-lived wastes. So aren't renewables a better solution to climate change? And what's with the connection between advancing nuclear energy and securing safe and secure solutions for spent nuclear fuel management? Question for you.
Thanks for the question, Vincent. So currently nuclear energy provides almost 20% of the United States electricity and half of our emissions-free energy. And so support for the expansion of nuclear power is currently high and has bipartisan support in Congress. So it is likely that nuclear power will continue to be used for electricity production in the future. So that being said, our focus here in the Office of Spent Fuel and High-Level Waste Disposition is on managing the back end of the nuclear fuel cycle. As many of you might know, DOE is responsible for the management of the 92,000 metric tons of spent nuclear fuel produced by nuclear power in the US. And as such, we, the department, is planning for an integrated waste management system to transport, store, and dispose of our nation's spent nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste in a manner that is safe and secure for the long term. An integrated waste management system, by the way, consists of the sites, the facilities, the equipment, and the personnel. And this includes the transportation system to move spent nuclear fuel and high-level radioactive waste, and a consolidated interim storage system and a geologic repository that Paul mentioned for permanent disposal. So we are working on solving this now so that it isn't a problem left for future generations to manage. Thanks, Vincent.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Kim. And that's actually a good segue to the next question. So we are building an integrated waste management system with federal consolidated interim storage, eventually a pathway to disposal, and transportation is a crucial part of this, is to transportation infrastructure. So here's a question for Erica Bickford, a talented specialist in this area. So Erica, when the time comes to transport the spent nuclear fuel to a federal consolidated interim storage facility, will infrastructure upgrades be necessary? Will DOE use pre-existing rail, road, barge routes in order to get it there? Or will there have to be additional transportation infrastructure built in order to make this happen, make this integrated waste management system that Kim Petrie just described functional?
All right, thank you, Vincent, and good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, transportation is a key piece of building this integrated waste management system that we envision. To set the stage, we currently have nuclear power plants storing spent nuclear fuel at more than 70 locations in more than 30 states around the United States. Once federal storage facilities, a consolidated interim storage facility, and then eventually permanent disposal facilities begin operations, spent nuclear fuel will need to be transported from those sites to those facilities. Whether the new transportation infrastructure will need to be built will depend on the condition of the infrastructure at origin and destination sites at the time of shipping. And that's something DOE will assess. We'll go and look at the condition of the infrastructure at the origin site and at the destination site in advance of shipping. At least 5 years ahead is our current plan. We currently expect that new on-site and near-site rail infrastructure, roads, and potentially barge docks will need to be built at the new Federal Consolidated Interim Storage Facility, and that'll be part of the whole facility's original construction. But we'll plan to use existing transportation infrastructure as available and upgrade it as we find it's needed. We've also discussed working with the U.S. Department of Transportation to encourage rail companies in particular to use their existing grant programs for infrastructure updates needed to support the safe transport of spent nuclear fuel. So the Federal Railroad Administration, which is part of the U.S. Department of Transportation, has grant programs to support maintaining and upgrading rail infrastructure, particularly for the shorter, what's called short lines or kind of smaller mom and pop type railroads that may struggle to find funds for those types of activities. The department has been and continues to evaluate the state of nuclear power plant on-site and near-site transportation infrastructure. We've been doing this for more than 12 years at this point. We issue a report periodically that's called the Nuclear Power Plant Infrastructure Evaluations for Removal of Spent Nuclear Fuel Report. The latest version that was released earlier this year has information on 20 different sites. And I think we're in the process of breaking that down into individual site reports. If you have a site in your community or that you're just interested in, you can look in that report to find photos and summary information on what the condition of the transportation infrastructure currently is. You can get that report on our DOE's Curie website. And then lastly, I want to be clear, because this is a question that comes up a lot. We currently have no existing routes for transporting spent nuclear fuel by rail, road, or waterway at this point. To identify a route, to have a route, you must know both the origin, which we have a good understanding of, but you also need to know the destination. And that's something that Marla Morales' office is currently pursuing. So once we have a destination, have a site located and confirmed by a willing and informed host community for a federal consolidated interim storage facility, then we'll be able to start looking at what potential transportation modes and routes may be available to transport that material. And so when we have that, we'll identify the routes in accordance with the federal regulations, which are set by the U.S. Department of Transportation, as well as, for situations where we may transport by barge, the U.S. Coast Guard. And so those include not just general transportation safety regulations, but they also have specific regulations for transport of radioactive materials and spent nuclear fuel.
Okay, thank you. That was an extremely informative answer, and I appreciate how systematically you laid that out. So you mentioned that the consent-based siting team is currently searching for the destination site for one or more federal consolidated interim storage facilities. It's a good segue over to a question for Marla Morales, the director of our program. And when we broach issues like transportation or the siting of a federal consolidated interim storage facility, tribal engagement and tribal outreach becomes incredibly important. We have nation-to-nation commitments to consultation, and it's the right thing to do to engage early and often and respect tribal sovereignty. So how will tribal outreach evolve through the second stage of the consent-based siting process as we move to the expression of interest phase that we mentioned before? Where is it now and where will it move?
Thank you for the question. So the federal government has a special responsibility to recognize tribal governments, tribal nations, and to protect tribal sovereignty and self-determination. And in that vein, DOE has internal policies for tribal engagement and implementation policies. It's Tribal Policy 144.1. But the number itself doesn't mean a whole lot, because there's also executive orders and there's other policies out there that federal governments are required to implement. We haven't always gotten it right, though, and that becomes the important part for consent-based siting going forward and collaboration with tribal governments. And I say that because DOE is now funding a tribal collaboration initiative, and that initiative is for tribes by tribes. And what we're saying at that point, we're saying, tribes, we've been trying to tell you how to communicate and how it's best for us to communicate with you. This is an opportunity for tribes to say, this is what we see as effective communication. This is what we know to be our narrative and our story. This is the voice we want to be heard. So that initiative is being started up right now. It'll actually continue going forward. It's in the early stages of planning right now, but once that gets implemented, that will be the DOE focus in the Office of Consent-Based Siting for tribal engagement going forward to make sure that the tribal voice is not lost.
Thank you, Marla. And it's been fantastic, actually, that some of the members of the Tribal Collaboration Initiative were present over the past 2 days at the Consortia quarterly meeting. So it's fantastic to have their representation there that we just had. So thank you so much for this response. And now I'll go over to one from Paul Murray, the Deputy Assistant Secretary. And Paul, the question for you is, DOE recently established the Office of Consent-Based Siting. But why is the consent-based siting program still a part of DOE in the first place? Didn't the 2012 Blue Ribbon Commission report on America's nuclear future recommend that spent nuclear fuel management should be spun off into its own mission-specific organization? So this question from the public is about, why is it still in DOE and will it remain in DOE?
Good question. So it remains in DOE because we await congressional direction to move out of DOE. Remember, the Office of Civilian Red Waste Management still exists. Okay, even though Yucca Mountain was stopped in 2010, the Office of Civilian Red Waste Management still exists. Okay, there's no funding appropriated to it, and therefore there's no people sitting in that office, but it's still part of the DOE structure. The legacy responsibilities for that office were shared out amongst a number of existing DOE offices, okay, of which DOE Nuclear Energy retains the responsibility for conducting R&D related to storage and transportation. So it comes back to the fact that before we can move back, we have to show that we are an engineering organization ready to deliver on our mission. We have to build the public trust, the political trust, and everything I talked about earlier is helping us to do that, Vincent. At the right time, the administration and the Congress needs to make the decision to move us back to a separate office, if that's what they want us to do, to start delivering on our mission. Okay? So as we get ready, as we start to swing from primarily being R&D to get ready to actually move stuff, site facilities, do designs, we're starting to show that we're getting ready. It's not something that can just happen overnight. You know, we're currently in DOE federally. I think if I counted correctly, there's about 24 federal DOE employees. In Akram, there's over 200 federal employees. So we've got to change, we've got to grow, we've got to build trust, and we've got to get the appropriations and the direction from Congress to actually move. I think we're making the right steps to do that.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that as well. So, I mean, the process of spinning off a new organization or moving it to an alternative organizational structure involves a lot of procedures and politics, as as Paul just alluded to. So that's actually Similarly, when you're citing a federal consolidated interim storage facility, there's a lot of politics and procedures to navigate as well. And a lot of the politics historically, this is a question for Dr. Petrie, have come at the state level. State level politics for many have been an issue in citing past nuclear waste and spent fuel facilities. You could have a lot of community energy at the local level, at the county level. You can have a lot of like federal interest and excitement and money going around to try to make this happen. But if there's not buy-in at the state level, we've seen problems occur and projects fall apart. So how is DOE engaging with states as it moves forward with consent-based siting, and how will we move forward engaging with states? How will this strategy evolve?
Thanks, Vincent. Thanks for that question. So our office is heavily invested in applying lessons learned. For example, when the department was seeking a site for a monitored retrievable storage facility, in the 90s, the DOE's Office of the Nuclear Waste Negotiator sent letters out to all 50 states asking for their interest in hosting a facility, and we received 0 responses back. So, learning from that experience, we are looking to engage early and often, but also strategically and with appropriate timing. We are also actively engaging with states through the state and regional groups, such as the National Conference of State Legislatures, the National Governors Association, and the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. And we have invited state-level entities into the conversation about consent-based siting in previous installments of this public webinar series. For example, during our last listening session back in February, we heard from representatives from the National Association of State Energy Officials, the Environmental Council of States, the Council of State Governments, and I could go on. The 12 project teams that comprise the consent-based siting consortia are currently engaging at the state level as well. And we will continue to do more and look into those lessons learned that that we have. So thanks, Vincent.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, and especially a nod to this webinar series, which we've been trying to integrate state level sort of representatives to this, and they've been very open to learn and share their views, and it's been very helpful. So thank you, Kim. So let's imagine a world in which we've surmounted a lot of these challenges that we've laid out so far. And imagine a world in which we've cited Federal Consolidated Interim Storage Facility. The Nuclear Waste Policy Act has changed. We've navigated shrewdly state level political considerations, and we've arrived and we've built the facility. So this is a question for Erica. So once it's in operation, what sort of mechanisms and tools and personnel will be required to monitor the transportation of the spent nuclear fuel to the Federal Consolidated Interim Storage Facility once we're down this path and it is built?
All right, thanks, Vincent. So you may not be aware, but the U.S. has a robust system for regulating transportation of spent nuclear fuel along with other radioactive materials. While it may not be as visible to the general public as other freight transport you may encounter, our country has many decades of experience with safely transporting spent nuclear fuel. U.S. Department of Transportation regulations, U.S. Department of Energy orders or directives, as well as requirements in the Nuclear Waste Policy Act Section 180, which is a section specific to transportation requirements, will govern shipments of spent nuclear fuel to Federal Consolidated Interim Storage Facilities and disposal facilities. These requirements include things like providing advance notification of shipments to tribal and state jurisdictions that will be transported through, requiring real-time monitoring of shipments during transport, as well as escort by armed guards, also called couriers. For DOE shipments of spent nuclear fuel, we've developed purpose-built rail cars. You heard Paul mentioned in his opening answer that we have the Atlas Railcar Consist was certified by the Association of American Railroads earlier this year. So we have one set of trains ready and able to transport spent nuclear fuel. And those rail cars were specially built and have special equipment on them to provide real-time monitoring of their GPS global positioning system and 10 other railcar equipment performance parameters that allow us to monitor the performance of the railcar during transport, so that if any component on the railcar started to fail or operate abnormally, we would be notified of it immediately and be able to stop the railcar and address it. This is all going to be monitored through our what's called an Integrated Security and Safety Monitoring System, or ISSMS, which will be placed on all of the rail cars that are involved in transporting spent nuclear fuel. We're also developing plans to establish a courier program. So again, those are the armed guards or armed escorts that will travel with the shipments of spent nuclear fuel, so that we can provide them with adequate training and stand up essentially a guard force to support these shipments. They'll ride along on every shipment. We have a specially designed rail car called the Rail Escort Vehicle, which is meant to carry personnel. So there's beds and a kitchen and other security and safety equipment in that rail car. And they'll be on board and they'll be monitoring that ISSMS system and be there to protect the shipment if anything abnormal should occur. We'll also have an emergency response center, sometimes also called a movement and control center, that will provide 24/7 monitoring and be staffed by trained personnel. The ability to monitor DOE shipments as they move through tribal and state jurisdictions will be also provided to those tribal and state governments through DOE's existing Transcom system. And if you are part of a state government that has experienced transuranic shipments to the waste isolation pilot plant, this is the same system that's used for those WIP shipments. And we've heard from our tribal and state partners that they like this system and they would prefer that DOE shipments of spent nuclear fuel use the same system. And so that's our current plan. And we're working with that program to integrate that with our rail car tracking systems. Prior to departure and arrival at a federal consolidated interim storage facility, the rail cars that are transporting spent nuclear fuel will be thoroughly inspected in accordance with the federal regulations, which will include a radiological inspection. We've also developed a process to be able to provide copies of these safety inspections to tribal and state governments along the transportation route. This is something that's available for highway shipments of certain radiological materials through what's called the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. It was not available for rail shipments, but we worked with our state and tribal partners as well as rail carriers to develop something comparable that will allow us to have sort of a reciprocal safety inspection for the rail shipments provided to the jurisdictions along the rail transport route.
Thank you, Erica. Another comprehensive and extremely detailed and I think very satisfying response to that question. So thank you so much for that. We have time for one more question from our pile of questions that we've received over the past few months. So we'll give this one to Marla. This is a consent-based siting event. So Marla, all right, so this is coming from the anthropologist in me that likes to imagine the world from other people's perspectives. So imagine you're living in a community and you're considering hosting a federal consolidated interim storage facility. One thing we've seen throughout the consent-based siting consortium process is that a lot of the communities that do show a lot of interest and enthusiasm about this are primarily interested in the economic dimensions of this. What's in it for us? So maybe you could give a perspective on what would the economic benefits or economic implications for a community be for hosting a federal consolidated interim storage facility?
So it would be important to recognize that all communities are different. And because all communities are different, as are all community economic portfolios and profiles. And I say that because the economic growth and economic potential and economic benefits for a community are going to be site specific. Does a community want a nuclear complex to come forward? Does it want to host a federal consolidated interim storage and an international research development center and something else in the nuclear realm? Potentially. Does a community want to have an interim storage facility and just a couple of jobs? Maybe. Like maybe what the conversation needs to be is, what is the community interested in that would allow them to host a facility, but also do they want to maintain their values and their goals that are specific to them? Do they want all of the big nuclear complex that can come with it, or they want to be small? That's part of a negotiation process. That's part of a conversation that needs to be had and be started, but each of those conversations will be different. It goes without saying that if you bring a facility in, it's going to have direct jobs, it's going to have construction jobs, it's going to need additional housing and additional education facilities, hospitals, potentially emergency services. All of that would come on with any industry going into a community. But additional economic opportunities, which is really what the question is, that's going to vary community to community. That's going to be up for conversation, which I think is really what we want to emphasize, is that in a collaborative process, it's a two-way street. It's a conversation to be had.
Thank you so much. And that concludes the segment of this webinar where we are answering questions from previous webinars that have been submitted and from the email inboxes, the many useful messages you sent to us, as well as from our social science research. We have teams of social scientists from our supporting national laboratories around the country doing interviews with people, doing focus groups, trying to learn from them. So thank you so much for the leadership panel for answering some of these questions that we've been putting together. So now we're actually going to pivot to, for the final stretch of this, answer some of the questions submitted to us by the live audience today. So we'll pull the whole panel up here. And these are questions that are hot off the presses from the Q&A section of Zoom. So here's one. So here's for the whole group. Can advanced reactors really be accepted by the public without first solving the spent nuclear fuel gridlock and stalemate that we're currently facing? How can you really make a pitch for advanced reactors without a strong solution for spent nuclear fuel? That's the first question. So it's all yours as a group.
The thing that people forget about is in nuclear, things take a long time. Okay. So even as we talk about building these new advanced reactors, let me take a step back. So as we look at building our consolidated interim storage facility, we talk about the first one opening in 2038. We hope to have a repository program up and going in the 2060s. These advanced reactors, people are talking about building them. So we're hoping to see them sometime in the 2030s. They'll start generating spent nuclear fuel in late 2030s, 2040s. By then, we should have a robust, I would hope we have a robust program up and going to manage the spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste. So that would be my answer. So I don't know if Kim or Erica or Marla.
Yeah, we're open to more too if you have any other perspectives. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I think that pretty much sums it up, right? So another question we have right here. Actually, I don't want to say another question because there's a long list of questions about exactly this topic, and I don't think this is a surprise to anyone in this room that this would be one of the questions. So we live in a democratic society. One quirk of our program is that it is contingent on congressional appropriations. It's also contingent on the will of various changing presidential administrations. So been watching the news. We have seeing a presidential administration change coming. And so what do you anticipate the effects of this change may or may not be January, after meeting with transition teams, et cetera, for federal consolidated interim storage 1, and then for consent-based siting 2?
Let me answer that one so nobody else gets.
Yeah. If you have a crystal ball, this would be a good time.
No, somebody's going to get fired.
Yeah,
So we are the only Western country that uses nuclear power, with the exception of Spain and the Ukraine, that doesn't have a robust repository program. Okay, so we're 60 years into this program. We're trying to come up with a way to manage the spent nuclear fuel. We're the largest user of nuclear power in the world, and we have bipartisan support for tripling nuclear by 2050. All right. So to me, it's just like we have to have a robust program in place to start moving forward. We'll go back to my previous answers. I think we truly are starting to demonstrate that we're making progress. Okay, we are, right? We have the opportunity now to move to the next phase. I'm hoping the next administration, I have no evidence for this, Vincent, will be supportive of what we're doing. If they support nuclear power and the growth of nuclear power, then we have to address the back end. This is a chance now to step forward. The recent nuclear liftoff report, which came out last week, talked about the need for a national program and a need for a geological repository. Okay. So I'm quietly optimistic. We're making progress. People can see we're making progress, and we'll be okay.
Thank you so much, Paul. And we have another question right here. Related to that topic, actually, has DOE settled on geologic criteria for an interim storage facility? Would like to take that one. That's a public question we just got.
So why do we even do interim storage in the US? That's a question we should ask ourselves. Nobody else is doing interim storage. So I'm going to answer a question slightly differently here, Vincent. So in 1982, the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, we signed a contract with the utilities to manage their spent nuclear fuel. Right? So starting in 1982, they paid us, based on the amount of electricity they produce, they paid us to basically take away and manage their fuel. So DOE is in a binding contract with the utilities. So today, that nuclear waste fund, and the number was just published this morning, stands at $50 billion. Sits in the nuclear waste fund where the US government has been paid to manage the spent nuclear fuel, right? So in 2014, we're actually supposed to start picking up the fuel in 1998. In 2014, the utilities sued us for partial breach of contract. And now they recover their costs for us not picking up the fuel. So that number runs about $800 million a year for partial breach of contract. We updated the liability estimate this morning. The total liability for us being in partial breach of contract now also stands at over $50 billion a year. Okay? So the reason we are doing consolidated interim storage is, as the federal government, we have to move to take title to that fuel and fulfill our contractual obligations. And so that's why we're doing consolidated interim storage. We need probably somewhere between 5 and 7 interim storage sites. Pretty much, we've looked at the siting. We will publish a siting criteria document next year. Pretty much most of the US could be suitable as consolidated interim storage facilities. Okay.
Thank you very much.
And Vincent, just to add that if I could, the Federal Consolidated Interim Storage Facility that we are endeavoring to build is the same regulations and requirements that you have at on-site spent fuel storage facilities at more than 70 nuclear power plant sites. So we've built and licensed and operated more than 70 sites across the country so far. So there's a lot of locations where these facilities can be constructed and operated, and we have a lot of experience doing that.
So I don't want to pile in, Vincent. Sorry.
Yeah.
So if the question was meant, what geological media can we cite a deep geological repository in?
Yeah,
We
they
can
said
cite-
CISF, but let's hear Deep Geologic Repository too, because that could be part of it. as
Okay,
well.
so based on the work we've done in the past, remember we've been at this for 60 years. This isn't our first rodeo here. We can cite a deep geological repository in any of the lower 48 states, with the exception of Idaho and West Virginia, where the media just isn't suitable for us to cite a repository. We could cite a repository anywhere else. Okay.
That works. Okay, so we have one from another audience member. So this is a good one. DOE released an RFI, a request for information, for the Federal Consolidated Interim Storage Facility in July that was closed in September. So the question is, when does DOE plan to release an RFP for the Federal Consolidated Storage Facility? So the next step, the RFP for it.
Sure, I'll take one. This is under my office. So we did issue a request for information, RFI, this summer to get input on how to scope and structure a contract which may include activities such as siting support, final design for the interim storage facility, licensing, and potentially construction and maybe the first year or so of operation. We received a number of responses, and we're reviewing those responses and taking that information in. We've also talked with other programs across the departments on the experience that they've had with contracting for similar type construction projects, and we're taking that input into our approach. We're developing our current strategy and timeline, but we plan to go out right now. We plan to have some industry days, probably around the spring to start with, to get more input from potential bidding companies for the structure and scope of the contract. After that, we plan to develop a draft RFP and put that out for public comment, and then potentially have additional industry days and/or maybe one-on-one meetings with potential bidders. So it's probably, we're looking in around 12 months to be posting a request for proposals, because we want to do our due diligence and make sure that we get we get the type of proposals, companies, skills, capabilities that we're looking for, and that we have a common understanding between what our goals are with this request for proposals, and that the companies that may bid on the contract or may partner together to bid on the contract have a clear understanding of what we're looking for.
Thank you so much. And we just got another one. We're slightly jumping around between topics, but this is good because it'll help us get to more questions from the audience. So here's one. So how does DOE's consent-based siting effort draw from or work with international partners? This person specifically actually wondering if we're working with or drawing from the experiences in Australia and the UK, the AUKUS nuclear propelled submarine efforts, for instance. So how does this international collaboration and cooperation or lack thereof play into this? This is a question for the group.
So I'll
Go
start
ahead.
this off and then maybe y'all
Yeah.
can finish it out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
at least for the lessons learned on that, there, as Paul mentioned, there's a number of facilities across the world that have started this process. So we've taken those lessons learned and how they began that process, what they implemented, who they reached out to, and how that process went, and incorporated that into our consent-based siting process. With the recognition that it's also a different story. Volumetrically, it's different, the politics are different, the dynamic is different. So what we can take from those organizations is what did work and how did it work, and then how can we apply that in a US version of this? And Paul, if you want to speak to specific facilities abroad.
No, I was just going to say that the nuclear industry is a small world, Vincent. So the head of the Australian program is somebody I used to work with back in the 1980s. But I know you can't believe I'm that old, but it's somebody I used to work with back in the 1980s. So we're in regular communication with each other. We also talk to all the other Western countries that have the large repository programs. So we talk to them about their successes, their failures, lessons learned. Kim this week just met with Finland. People from Kosovo were across, and we met with Finland. We have regular communications with Canada, and I talk on a regular basis to the UK government and the whole UK program of what's going on there. So there is a very more tightly knit community of countries with repositories, and we do talk on a regular basis. We meet twice a year, face to face, and it's a very frank and open discussion. So we do take a lot of input in.
All right. So it looks like we have time for one more. Thank you very much, Paul, for that. And this is kind of interesting for me because I'm both trying to actively listen to you and read through all the questions being submitted by the audience. So I'm actually learning a lot in a small amount of time, kind of multitasking over here, but looks like we have time for one, maybe two more. So how about, yeah, so this is just essentially a question. I think this person's just probably has a technical background or engineering background, is trying to visualize what this specific facility will look like, the Federal Consolidated Interim Storage Facility. So could you tell us a bit about the design? How big is this going to be? What's the land footprint? What sort of materials will it be made of? Let's make this more of a palpable, concrete reality. When it comes to be? What's it look like? What's it built out of?
I'm going to jump in before Erica jumps in here, even though it's in your area. Sorry, Erica. So I'm passionate about this. So the first facility is going to be about 2 square miles. Okay, so if you look at the classic design of an interim storage facility, if you look at any type of reactor, it's like a concrete pad, right, with spent nuclear fuel casks on. Is that what that community wants? I'm not sure. So one of the things we're doing is we've gone out, or about to go out to 6. We're going to put an RFP out to some universities to come up with different concept designs for us. Is it a building? Is it below grade? Is it above grade? Does it look like a multi-story car park? I don't know. But we got to, so the final facility will look, we've got to have input from the community it's going to be hosted in to basically say, this is what they want. Okay. If you go to the naval facility in Idaho, that's indoors. Okay. So if we built a consolidated interim storage facility up in the northern states, then potentially we would have to build indoors to keep us out of the weather type of thing. Once again, the final design will be up to the local community. be the input from the local community. It will be part of a cooperative, collaborative program with that community to give us input to what they want. Okay.
Amazing. And it does look like we have 2 minutes left. We have time for one more. So this is a really interesting one. Thank you so much for the questions so far. These have been, I think, really helpful. And we're going through a lot of the ones we have here. And if people in the audience have follow-up questions, please feel free to submit them to us. Go to our website, get our email address, and reach out to us. We'll address those too. So final question for you. So DOE has a social science program. It's no secret. We've talked about it here. We've done all sorts of different methodologies from fieldwork, sort of focus groups and interviews to sort of media monitoring through large language models, through surveys and polls, et cetera, et cetera. So the question from this audience member is, will any of this be made public at any point? And I guess this is a question for Marla or Paula or whoever else wants to chime in, but will this be made public?
So the work that DOE has done in the social science realm, we have every intention of releasing in the form of one pagers and synopses of the work that's been done, because it's important for people to know what has gone on. But with that, the other side of that is that work is also actively being incorporated into our collaboration going forward. So if the question is, am I going to see the results? Yes, we will release some. We will release results as appropriate. But the other side of that is, please don't lose sight of the fact that all of that information is currently being rolled into our consent-based collaboration process as we move forward, and will continue to be as an iterative process.
Okay, does anyone want to add to that? All right, well, thank you so much to this leadership panel for coming together. We made it through a lot of questions that have been piling up over the past few webinar sequences, and we've made it through some really challenging and really interesting and thought-provoking, I'd say, questions from the public audience. And so thank you so much for joining us, to the 4 members of our panel, and thanks most of all to the people who chose to attend this webinar. We've reached the end of our time together, and this has been a wonderful and wide-ranging discussion. If you have any more questions as audience members or perspectives to share, feel free, as I mentioned, to send them to us via email. Our email address is consentbasedsiting@hq.doe.gov. And we appreciate your interest in consent-based siting and look forward to further engagement in the future. So thank you from the U.S. Department of Energy.